Welcome everyone, I'm Adrian and this is another screencast on how to build an app in less than an hour. Today we'll build a booking app where we'll manage users, locations, rooms, and give the ability to our users to create bookings for those rooms. We'll use Ruby on Rails and Avo to get this done quickly. We'll end up with 4 models: a user which has a name and an email, a location that has a name, description, and a photo, a room that has a name, a description, a photo, and a location ID, so it references the location, and a booking, which is actually a pivot model that ties in the room and the user together and holds information regarding when has the booking been made, so a timestamp, and for how long. We'll talk about installing Rails, Active Storage, Devise, and Avo, and proceed to create our models, set up our resources, tweak the app to add the features we need, and of course we'll talk about dashboards, filters, and actions too. So let's dive in. We'll start by generating a new Rails app. I selected Tailwind for CSS, but that's really not important for this demo. Next, I'll install the image processing gem and install Active Storage for fast file uploads. Now I'm adding Devise from a Rails Base template. I'll select the user as the model and add the name as a new string property. I'll also enable Turbo for Devise. We'll commit these changes to better show what we're left off at the end. Next, let's install Avo from an app template. This will add the gem to the gem file, run the install script to generate the initializer and locales. I'll switch to the Pro license to show you some cool features. Now I'll create the home controller, route, and view to show the home page. Let's start the server and see what we got. If we go to the Avo path, we'll see the admin panel already created for us. But you probably don't want this up available for everyone, so let's move this Avo path under user authentication. Now, if we refresh the page, we'll get redirected back to the sign up page. I'll create a user to get access to Avo behind authentication. Now, let's create a resource file for the user model. The way Avo CRUD functionality works is that for each Rails model, we create an Avo resource. The resource file tells Avo what to display on the admin page, and through it, it knows how to talk to the model and fetch the data. After we refresh, we can already navigate to the users page and see all the users. We can only see the ID by default, but let's change that. We'll add the name and email as text fields. When we go back, we see the name and email appear on the table. What I like to do more is to add a gravatar field to fetch a gravatar for that email. Next, I'll edit this user and add the name. Next, let's create the models we talked about and their resources. We'll migrate the data and now Avo knows about them. Now let's add the image attachment to our model and add the fields to our resources. Name as text, description as text area. You can also use the tricks field if you want something more expressive than the text area. I'm adding the file field and marking it as an image. Now when we return to Avo, we can start to create the records we need. I'll fast forward this process a bit. Now let's make this a little bit more expressive. You'll see the ID of the resource everywhere, and that's not very pretty. Let's tell Avo what is the title of the resource. I'll go on the resource file and change it to a name. Now let's configure the room resource. Let's add the name and description fields and the file field. We'll configure the room model to have that photo attachment. Now we know that the room belongs to a location, so let's tell Avo about that with a special belongs to and as many fields. Now, when we visit a location, we'll see another panel with the location's rooms. And let's create a few rooms. For each room, we'll select the associated location. Cool, now let's make this listing a little bit better looking. Let's create a grid item. We'll add a grid configuration to which we have to tell it what is on the cover, title, and body of the grid item. Similarly to how we configure the fields for the table, we configure our with fields. Next, we'll tell Avo to use that grid view type as the default one. Now the images are a little bit bigger and better looking. We'll do the same thing to the location resource. Now this body is a little bit too big. Let's create a computed field that takes the body attribute and makes it shorter. Maybe 30 characters is too short, so let's make it 50. What I usually do next is to mark the image and the title as a link to that resource. Now we can see the locations and rooms in a grid view. We can always switch back to the table view if we wanted that. Cool. Next, let's configure our booking model. This is going to be a pivot model between a user and a room. I'll tell Avo it belongs to a user and to a room. Now, when I try to create a booking, we'll see that the user is represented through the ID, and we don't want that. Let's change that title to be the name of the user. Yep, that's better. We have now our first piece of core functionality. Next, let's add the booked at and booked for fields to our booking resource. For simplicity's sake, we'll let the user select between 2, 4, 6, and 8 hours. Now the user can select the number of hours they want to book the room for and the starting time. Next, let's attach these bookings to the room. Similarly to how we attach the rooms to the location, when we go to a room, we'll see all the bookings for that room. But maybe we don't want to see all the bookings. Maybe we just want to see the ones that are from the future. We'll use the scope option where we have access to the query that we want to modify. Let's say the query where created at is larger than now. And we've made a mistake. We need a booked at attribute. And these are not bookings anymore, but future bookings. So let's change the name. Cool, this is better. If we go and create a booking for a room, you'll see that the room dropdown is read-only. Can't change that because you created the booking from that room. Let's say you want to do the same for the user. Let's say we'd like to have the current user pre-selected in that dropdown. Before we go and do that, let me show you the context object. This is a global object evaluated in the application controller. So let's add the current user to the context object. Now let's return to the booking resource on the user field and add the default option on the field. We'll use the current user from the context object that we set up earlier. Now when we refresh, Avo will know from that option to pre-fill that field. Now if we mark it as read-only, this feature will become even better. A user can create a booking only for themselves. Another thing we do with records is to search them. Avo has built-in search functionality. We use ransack to query the results, but you can use something else if you want to. So let's configure a search block to search by name and descriptions for rooms and locations. I'll install ransack and restart the server. Now we have the global resource search. Let's make it a bit prettier. We'll go to the room and location resources and add as avatar to the photo field and as description for the body field. Now the search is a little bit richer with information and looks better. Sometimes we don't want to show our data in a CRUD interface, but aggregate it in a dashboard. Let's create a dashboard. When we navigate to it, we'll see that we don't have any cards present. Let's create one. We'll generate a metrics card called bookings count. Let's take this card name and add it to the dashboard. Each card has a few specific options like the name, description, and more. Now we have this card with a metric showing in just a few simple steps. In the query method, you can get your data from the database or from an API endpoint and assign that to the result. We'll get all the created bookings. Let's create another metric card called booked hours, where we'll show the number of hours of our rooms that have been booked for. Let's go to the query method and make the query. We're going to pluck the booked for attribute from all the bookings and sum them all up. So we have 10 hours of bookings, but let's make something even more useful. I'll fill this initial range option with one of our locations and ranges with all of our locations. We want to let the user pick the location and show the number of hours that that location has been booked for. Let's now update the query method. We'll get the selected location, the IDs for the rooms for that location, and get all the bookings for those rooms. Let's see what we got. Sky Tower 0, Citygate 0, and Tim Purnoy 0. Now if we create another booking for Tim Purnoy and test it out, we get the 2 hours for that booking. That was the metric card. Avo has another partial card and a chartkick card, which I'll demo right now. Let's generate the chartkick card bookings over time and add it to our dashboard. After we refresh, we get the chart generated for us without any type of JavaScript or asset work from our side. But let's make it even better. I'll go and set 3 columns for this card to give it some breathing room. Good. The data for this chart is totally random and I'll not be generating custom data, but you get the point on how to configure it. Another thing we usually do with our data is to fetch a small subset of it. We can filter them using Avo filters. Let's generate a filter for that. Before we configure it, we'll add it to the booking resource. Let's configure it by adding one option, only for future bookings with the key future. We have another method called apply that's similar to our query method from the cards, where we add all the business logic. We'll see if the future option has been passed, and if that's true, we'll return the query with only the records that have the booked at property greater than the present time. Let's see how that works. I'll create another booking and set it to the past. I'll open my filters panel and I'll select only future bookings. Now only the bookings that are in the future will be present, so this is so much more useful. Another thing we usually do with our records is to apply actions to them. Let's generate a new action and add it to the booking resource. Now we can see the action. It's disabled by default, but after we select a record, it will be enabled. When you click it, it's not going to do anything, but we just get a feedback message. Now let's configure it. In the handle method, we receive the selected records and we'll iterate over them and make a change. We'll add 2 more hours to the booked at time. Let's select a record. It's 9 o'clock, run the action, and it becomes 11 o'clock. We can also run this action from the show page. Let's make this a little bit more expressive and let the user choose the number of hours they want to delay it by. Add a field just like you'd add it to the resource. Number of hours as a number. We'll select a record, select the action, and now we have the field. We'll pass in the 3 hours, and when we run it, it will still be delayed by only 2 hours because we didn't use that in our logic. Let's do that now. We'll create a new variable named number of hours from the fields attribute we get with the value the user passed in. We'll use that value or default to 2 hours. Now, if we try that action again, we get a crash. We need to cast this to an integer. Let's try again. From 11 with 3 more hours, it's 14. That's perfect. But let's make that even more expressive. Let's add a default of 1 hour and a helper message so the user knows better what the value will do. Let's try that again. We get the message and the default number of hours. Yeah, that's better. We can apply this action to 1 or more records at a time. So that was building a booking app in less than 1 hour with minimal effort. That's the power of Avo, a fully functional and usable app that you can give to your end users. If you enjoyed this kind of content, subscribe to the channel, like our video, and let us know in the comments or on Twitter. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.